Well, I'm glad you're with us, and I'm glad those who are watching online, we're glad you're with us today. I want to begin by first by saying thank you. Last week was Staff Appreciation Week, and so many of you wrote cards and made donations to show appreciation to the staff. So on behalf of the entire staff, I just want to say thank you for your generosity, and thanks for the notes, and thanks for your support. It's an honor to work here, and it's fun, and I love all you guys. Thank you for all that you do. I want to begin with a simple question. Where do you like to eat? Where do you like to eat? Probably we have different ways to answer that question depending on where you're at. If you're in Knoxville, that's one thing. If you're in Lenoir City or Loudon, that might be a different thing. Some of you prefer to eat at home. Some of you might like to eat out. And if you go to eat out, where do you like to eat? I thought this would be a great opportunity for me to get some sponsorship dollars for to be able to get some free meals, but I didn't think of that in advance enough. But one of the places I love to eat, I won't tell you the name because there's no sponsorship involved, but there's a place by Starbucks in town that is for Mexican I just really love. I love it because they provide heaping bowls of rice and beans, and if you ever order the shrimp bowl, it's fantastic because they don't just give you like 3 or 4 shrimp, they like dump it all on there, and it's really good. I also like the fact that they have, if you want to eat cheaply, I discovered that you can order 3 soft tacos with chips and like a little salsa for $5.99, and I was like, man, that's a great deal. You can't find that anywhere. So anyway, that's one place I like to go. There's another place I like to go to eat in town, which is in a gas station. All right. So I love this place. I like kind of Indian food. And some of you, once again, there's no sponsorship dollars involved, so I won't mention the name. But I love it because they have, I love Indian food. And the outside doesn't look particularly fantastic, but they have great food. And I love their buttered naan. It's just great. So where do you like to eat? Most likely you have things that you are excited about, that you would like to tell others about. And no doubt you've told people some of your favorite restaurants. The simple principle is this. We share what we're excited about. We share what we're excited about. In the series that we're undergoing this fall, or we're looking at this fall, looking at this idea of practicing Christians. And the main idea about that is, in the church, many people focus on doing church so well. I think it's probably more important that we be the church better. Wouldn't you agree? Would you agree on that? Is it not just about production and lights and all those types of things? How we can embody what it means to be a follower of Jesus. If that was present among us individually and corporately, as well as all those who claim the name of Christ, our world would be in a different place. We've been looking at different areas of character and generosity and your time. Today I'm going to be talking about witness. It's been said the Christian story is the greatest story ever told. The challenge that we have in our culture is many people aren't interested in hearing the story that is being told. So how do we tell it well? And why do people are not interested as much in it? And it might be some of the same reasons that you have experienced over time. I think there's 2 primary reasons why we're reluctant to share. The first is insensitivity. Insensitivity. Perhaps you have gone by a church, like I used to go by this church, and they would have one of those front signs that you could change out front. And I won't tell you where this was, but the message was, turn or burn. Now that's only a short number of letters that you need to put on the marquee, but still, that communicates, doesn't it? That communicates what they believe and also how it comes across. And some, particularly based on experiences people had, they're hesitant to kind of share their faith or share the gospel because you've had negative experiences where somebody tried to just beat you on the head with the Bible, or they try to convert you and kind of be a notch on their belt, but maybe they're not really interested in you. Insensitivity. The second one is fear. Fear. Fear that maybe what you share will be rejected, or maybe you won't share it well, or maybe your relationship will be impacted. And for that reason, some of those reasons, we don't share. John 14:6, you might be familiar with this, says this. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Now, if this is true, if this verse is true, what Jesus actually communicated, he's talking about two different things. And many times we only take it in one way. Many times when I heard this verse, I thought of this, that if people do not accept Christ, then they will spend eternity with God, without God, and they will be in eternity without God in hell. And I would say that eternity without God, we have no idea exactly what that's going to be like. Is that going to be an eternal nothingness? Or is that going to be torture? Is that going to be pain? What's that going to be like? And for many, when we're told about the sharing the gospel, we share it from that perspective. But it's interesting, it says, Jesus, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. And so one of the things we believe as Christians, that following Jesus is actually a good way to live. Following Jesus is a good way to live. Would you agree on that? All right, so let me give you an example. In our divided world today, Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount said, forgive your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. Let me ask you that question. Would you think our world would be a better place instead of being divided as enemies, us versus them, that the people on different sides would pray for one another and try to seek reconciliation? Would that be a better way to live? Or would it be better to live, you live on that side, I live on that side, and we never come together? I think it's a better way to follow Jesus' teachings. Sometimes it's painful, sometimes it's awkward, sometimes it's going to cost you. But following Jesus' teachings is just a good, better way to live. So I want to look at the passage from the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 5. If you have your Bibles, I invite you to open to Matthew chapter 5, or you can access a sermon notes on the YouVersion app. If you came in today, I want you to notice something. Some of you may have picked up a Bible there, and you're welcome to pick up a Bible any Sunday. And so I'm just going to focus on this couple passages in Matthew chapter 5. We're going to look actually at Matthew 5, verses 1 and 2, because I want you to understand the context of how this is communicated. Matthew chapter 5, verse 1, it says this. Now when Jesus saw the crowds, he went up on a mountainside and he sat down. His disciples came to him and he began to teach them. Now what's going to come next is his Sermon on the Mount. But I want you to notice two audiences are there. You have the crowds and you have the disciples. Who is this addressed to? Who is the primary audience? The primary audience are the disciples. So think of it like this. In all the teachings of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus is teaching his core followers, and then there's this larger crowd surrounded around him of what I would call, quote unquote, potential disciples. Those who are leaning in, considering the teachings of Jesus and considering following him. So that's the context of all that happens in the Sermon on the Mount. So let's look at these verses in particular. Verse 13. You are the salt of the earth. Notice the tense of that verb, present tense. You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It's no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. Now, in our culture today, we think of salt being basically a flavoring, but in that culture, it was a preservative. There's no refrigeration, so if you wanted to take meat, what you would do is put it in salt. Now, it's very interesting to note, if you know anything about that culture, there's something called the Dead Sea there. In the Dead Sea, there's no water coming into it, and if you go there today, you can actually go there and float because the amount of salt that's in the water. And back in Jesus' day, people would get salt and use that Dead Sea salt as a preservative. The interesting thing about it is they found over time that it contained other type of things in it, and as a result of that, it was kind of worthless. It didn't last. So Jesus is taking sort of something that they would, in that culture, know about, that Dead Sea salt, Now, we don't want that Dead Sea salt. We want some other salt that would be imported in because it would preserve the meat that we have. So what Jesus is trying to say here is, don't be something that's of inferior quality. My followers, are not to be worthless. Instead, you are the preservative of our society. Verse 14, Jesus says this, you are the light of the world. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. In a couple books over in John, Jesus says actually that I am the light of the world, John chapter 8. So which one is it? I am the light of the world, or we are the light of the world? What we do as Christians, as followers of Jesus, is simply as we are following Jesus, we reflect his light in our lives. And then it says in verse 16, in the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. So don't hide your light, don't hide it under a bushel, but let it shine. Where do you let it shine? You let it shine in your workplaces, in your neighborhoods, in your sports teams, at the gym, anywhere you go, we're called to share and extend his light. So I want to have us think about, how are we to be a witness? Specifically from this passage, how are we to be witnesses? And I want you to consider 3 areas of your life of how we can be witnesses as practicing Christians. The first is simply your character. Your character says a lot about you before you open your mouth, before you do anything. Your character speaks. So, for example, if you're in a situation where maybe you're in a work situation where there's a person where everybody sort of talks about them behind their back. Have you ever been in a situation like that? What are you tempted to do? What do you do in that situation? Especially if you agree with them. What do you do with that? Do you just keep your mouth shut? Do you jump in and say, yeah, you think that's bad? Let me tell you another story about this guy. No. I think what we would do as a person of character is not speak down about somebody, but instead we try to find something positive about somebody. Character matters. Character matters. James Clear, who wrote a book called The Atomic Habits, some of you may have read that book, he writes us about the workplace environment. And he says this, you can come at a very good career by simply being the most reliable person on a team. You would not think that always showing up on time, hitting every deadline, and responding quickly and professionally to all communication would be such a good differentiator. But these traits are always in short supply. Being a person who's not lazy at work. Have you ever gone by like somebody working, a crew working on a street, and there's like 2 guys working and there's 8 guys supervising, you know? Your character matters, the way you respond to people. Second way is simply our deeds. Our deeds. At the end of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says, by their fruit, you will recognize them. What do they say? Actions speak louder than words. What you do communicates sometimes more powerfully than our words, because words often are cheap. You might remember in January of this year, when it was bitter cold and we had all this ice, there were people who opened up warming stations in Knoxville and in the area to provide warming stations for people, to provide them for food and to sleep overnight. Do you know what was so cool about that? So many of them were United Methodists that did that. I remember seeing that on the news, and I'm seeing all these places downtown doing that. Acts of love, acts of service, acts to show by loving people speak volumes. I like this quote by mystic Saint Teresa of Avila. She says, Christ has no body on earth but yours. Yours are the eyes with which he looks compassionately on the world. Yours are the feet with which he walks to do good. Yours are the hands with which he blesses the world. Christ has no body on earth but yours. And sometimes you might think, this little act of service isn't a big deal. I can't do great things. Remember what Mother Teresa said? Mother Teresa said, you might not be able to do great things, but you can do small things with great love. So it's not just your character. Secondly, it's not just your deeds. Third is your words. Your words matter. Our words matter. You do not need to be God's lawyer to try to argue people into the kingdom of God. But what you can do, simply, is testify. Testify to what God has done in your life. You don't have to try to win somebody to Christ. You can simply testify how good God has been to you. It's because of something you have experienced. 1 Peter chapter 3 says, always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. To be ready to share. And how do we share? Notice what it says. But we do this with what? Say this out loud. With gentleness and respect. We don't need to put down other people or other religions. We do this with a kindness, but we are able to communicate the truth with love. So what is the message that we communicate? I want to show you a word here in the Greek language. It's the word sozo, or salvation. It means to save, to rescue, to heal, to deliver, or to make whole. Now, when I was growing up and I would go to different places and I heard about to be saved, what does it mean to be saved? What does salvation mean? My understanding of salvation was simply that being a follower of Jesus, or as a person, that I am separated from God's love because I'm not separated from God's love, but I have chosen to go my own way, and there's sin that's impacting my relationship with God. And so what I need to do to be saved is I need to simply confess my sins and trust Jesus Christ for my salvation, so that when I confess him with my mouth, then I go to heaven when I die. And for many, that's all salvation is. It's simply about something that happens, making sure my afterlife is secured. But is that all salvation is? If you notice the definition, it's a pretty broad term. It's actually used 100 times in the New Testament. And what I've been learning over the past number of years is salvation is a much richer concept than simply eternal security. You've probably heard it said that, maybe by an evangelist, what would happen if you died tonight? Do you know where you're going to go? That's an important question. Another important question to ask is, if you don't die tonight, say you lived and you lived to a ripe old age, will your life have made a difference? Would your life have counted? Did you invest your time well to something that would last? So what if salvation was not just about getting to heaven when you die, but to heal the human heart? In the Practicing the Way book that many of our groups are going through, I like how John Mark Comer says it. Something is off in the human heart. Why is there something off in the human heart? Why is there just something that's just a little out there? Augustine, who ended up being a great writer for the Christian faith, was a Hellion growing up. And he tells the story. His mom would pray for him. And there was a time when he was a teenager when he saw an apple, what's it called? Apple orchard, that's it, orchard, that's the word I'm looking for. And there was a fence over there, and him and his friends climbed the fence to steal apples. And as he was reflecting on it, he thought, why did I do that? I don't like apples, so why did I climb the fence? The reason he stole the apples is because he could climb the fence. He just wanted to do something different. He wanted to do what he wanted to do. What if salvation is about healing your soul? Healing your soul of things that are just off. And in my experience, no matter how old you are, you still have a ways to go in terms of being right. I like this quote by John Mark Comer. Salvation is not just about getting on the right side of God's mercy through judicial acquittal. It's about having your soul healed by God's loving touch. So I have to think about that as you're trying to share your faith with others. The people in your life, as well as your own soul, have areas of your life that need God's loving touch. And one of the ways that you're trying to communicate about your faith is how God is healing you. Not just getting your eternal destiny secured, but how is God changing you? And I would say one of the most effective ways of communicating your faith is simply the fact that I am not there yet. Maybe I started here, I should be here, but I'm in between here. And God's working in my life, and this is what God's doing. It's not complete. Communicate the fact that you don't have it all together and how God is shaping you to be more like Him. So my question to you and those who are watching online is simply this. How do you need the touch of God in your life today? How do you need the touch of God in your life? I would submit that most of us have areas of life that we need God to touch. And when we tell others about our faith, about what God's doing in our life, God can use that to impact them. God can use somebody like me. God can use anybody. I was thinking this morning, as I got up this morning, I was thankful for my mom. My mom who, when I was in 3rd grade, encouraged me politely to go to summer camp, church camp. And we studied the Bible a lot there. And we couldn't wear shorts. But that's a whole other story. I don't have enough time. But God did something in my life at that camp. I'm thankful for a guy named Mike Mendez, who when I was a sophomore in high school, when we were in choir together, he was a drummer. He invited me to join him at a Young Life club. And there I heard about the gospel, and it became more real to me. I'm thankful for a guy named Alan Hauser, who when I was a sophomore at Eastern College, invited me to go to a youth culture class from the youth ministry department. And it was there that I began working on some of the things I never worked at when I was in high school. It all came because of an invitation. Friends, the way you live, your deeds, the words that you say matter. People need to see real Christians live their faith. Look for opportunities that the Holy Spirit gives you to share your faith with others. Chris is going to close us in this final song. And when he plays, he's going to play a little chorus. And I just thought as we end the service today, if any of you need a touch, God's healing touch in your life, you need to do some business with God, you can do that in your seat. You can come to the altar. But I just want to give us a moment before we rush on with our day, just to allow God to touch our hearts. I invite you to stand. If you'd like me to pray for you, I'll be over here. But you're invited to come.
Down, we lay